An occupational pension scheme, a BAV, can be a great way to prepare for your retirement. It is often advertised with significant tax advantages. But you shouldn't be fooled, because there are quite a few pitfalls with the BAV. There are some excellent BAV offers, but unfortunately also some bad ones, and you simply shouldn't rely blindly on your employer. In this video, we'll talk about the mistakes you can make with an occupational pension scheme. I'm Saidi from Finanztip. Enjoy the video. Mistake number 1. Boss, you miss out on a hefty employer contribution. So what exactly would count as a high employer contribution? The classic example would be that your employer matches your contributions. So you pay 100 euros from your gross salary into a company pension plan, and your employer adds another 100 euros. In most cases, that's a no-brainer. Just from this substantial contribution alone, the whole thing naturally yields a hefty return. In 2025, the rule is that a maximum of 322 euros per month can go into a company pension plan free of social security contributions, and up to 644 euros per month can be contributed tax-free. Even with a 2-to-1 ratio, for example, you pay in 100 euros and your employer adds 50 euros, that's still a pretty substantial contribution, which is almost always worth it. The lower the percentage your employer contributes, the more important it is that your company pension plan doesn't cost too much and is truly a good offer, which in many cases isn't easy for you to figure out. By the way, the employer is required to contribute at least 15%. And by the way, even if you receive a really high employer contribution, I would almost always advise you not to base your entire retirement plan on a company pension, but, if at all possible, to also set up an ETF savings plan. Why? That's what we'll get to next. Mistake number 2, you overlook taxes and social security contributions in retirement. That always sounds so great at first. For example, 100 euros are deducted from your gross salary and paid directly into the company pension plan. That ultimately has a much bigger impact than if you had to pay it from your net salary. You would basically have to save away on 200 euros net to achieve the same result, roughly speaking. The catch, of course, is that what you get out of it in the end, usually a monthly pension, sometimes a lump sum payment, has to be fully taxed. And above all, is subject to full social security contributions. That means if you are legally insured, you have to pay the full health and long-term care insurance contributions. To give you an idea of the scale, let's say you later receive 250 euros from an occupational pension scheme, basically paid out as a company pension. From that, the full health insurance contribution is deducted for about 11 euros and 87 cents, and the full long-term care insurance contribution, another 2 euros and 49 cents. Then this payout from the occupational pension scheme is added on top of your statutory pension. Then you'll also have to pay some taxes on that. Let's say here with a tax rate of 20%. That's another 50 euros in taxes that are deducted. That means net, you're left with only about 185 euros out of the 250 euros. And the point now is, depending on the situation in your company, such as whether an insurance broker is involved, on behalf of the employer, it can definitely happen that these deductions in retirement are not made entirely clear to you. The decisive factor to balance out this burden of deductions in retirement so that the whole thing is worthwhile, C point 1, is a really high employer contribution. That's when it really pays off. Mistake number 3, you overestimate the returns of a company pension plan. When you look at an offer for an occupational pension plan that your employer presents to you, you'll sometimes come across terms like equity-based, fund-based, or high yield. And that somehow makes it sound like you can not only save from your gross salary, but also get something similar to an ETF investment. Because in most cases in Germany, occupational pension plans have the same problem as a Riester pension. Because in both cases, what is paid in, both your own contributions and those from your employer, must be guaranteed at maturity. And that's why a large portion of the money has to be invested very safely, which means it tends to yield low returns. That's also the reason why when you create your asset overview or balance sheet, you should classify your occupational pension plan just like a Riester contract under safe investments rather than under the risky and therefore high yield ones such as an ETF savings plan. And that's why, once again, a mix of occupational pension plans as a safe investment for retirement and ETF savings plans as a more volatile but higher yield investment for retirement makes so much sense. Remember, in the end, just like with the Riester plan, the return on an occupational pension usually comes from the employer's contribution. Mistake number 4, you sign up for an expensive direct insurance policy, even though you don't even know how long you'll stay. There are cases where an occupational pension plan is really affordable because the employer truly wants the best for their employees. But there are also cases where it's a relatively expensive direct insurance policy from which mainly the insurer and the brokers profit. And these costs are only worth it for you if you receive a high employer contribution and receive it for many years. In other words, if you stay with that particular employer for a relatively long time, because even if you can take this relatively expensive occupational pension plan with you to your next employer, which isn't guaranteed, you can't count on your next employer contributing as much. It's really difficult for you to determine how high the employer contribution needs to be for the costs of a direct insurance or an occupational pension plan to be worthwhile. Just remember the following. You should always make sure that the employer contribution is as high as possible, and generally only opt for an occupational pension plan if you intend to stay with that employer long term. At this point, I'd be interested to hear some examples from you. Which occupational pension plan have you signed up for? How do you rate your employer's respective offer? And feel free to include the name of your employer as well. That would give you all an interesting overview. Go ahead and write that in the YouTube comments. If these were helpful tips regarding the offers you get from your employer, then please give this video a like. See you next time.